So everyone, we're going to talk about ranked season battle, season 10, and we're going to go with what's the best and what's the worst. So in the beginning it's tier 8 up to rank 10. It's going to be a repeat of last season in terms of maps and the tiering and that type of stuff as far as I'm aware. So what is the worst tier 8 carrier to use? Well, it's the Lexington. So why is the Lexington bad? It primarily comes down to the fact that it only has a single fighter wave. If we go here into modules, has a single fighter wave, has limited map presence, has a single torpedo bomber wave, can't cross drop, has armor piercing or high explosive dive bombs, but the dive bombs themselves are not accurate. So it just falls into many complications. If you're going for an American carrier, the Enterprise just does everything that the Lexington does, but better. So it's not that great. I say it's not that great. I mean, the Lexington is a perfectly capable carrier, but not compared to everyone else. So that's in 4th place. Now, in 3rd place is actually the Shukaku. Now, the Shukaku used to be a fantastic carrier, but it's unfortunately maybe not a victim of power creep, but it's a changing of meta. What's happening now is that it's no longer a game of bleeding the targets or doing sustained damage over time, because you've got 2 torpedo bombers and 2 dive bombers, although they're high explosives, so you have flooding and fires. So in that sense, it's better to hit multiple destroyers, but with the number of ships now that have radars and detections and hydros, pushing for caps and a large DD meta isn't the thing anymore, at least in the European region. You'll find that usually we have more cruisers, like 1-2 battleships, and that's it. And so you're going to have very few destroyers. So if it's a heavy destroyer meta, the Shukaku would be better with its cross-dropping capability, but it's just not the case. And that's why it would be in 3rd place. Now, it's a close 3rd place. It's not terrible. All the Shukaku, Enterprise, and Graf Zeppelin are all relatively close, and all of them can quite happily get you to rank 10 when you change to tier 10. But I rank the Shukaku in 3rd place. Coming in 2nd place is actually the Enterprise. Believe it or not, many people would think that the Enterprise is top dog, but it's not. See, the Enterprise has tier 7 fighters, but so does the Graf Zeppelin, so it doesn't get the benefit from Dogfight Expert. Thank you for the sub, sir. So anyway, with that in mind, it's got wonky cross-dropping, it's got armor-piercing bombs, and at the tier 8 meta, yes, you're going to have a variety of battleships, and it's all about the Alpha Strike. And the Enterprise does an extremely good job, because it can Alpha Strike battleships, do a huge amount of damage, and give your team the advantage. It's rare that the games will play out long, to the full kind of time limit. You can still somewhat cross destroyers with the wonky drop that the Emperor has, but it's not really as good as the Graf Zeppelin. What makes the Graf Zeppelin good? Well, I'm not talking 1-2-1 Graf Zeppelin, and that's not to say that you can't use 1-2-1 Graf Zeppelin, which is the standard setup, which is kind of all strikey. 1-2-1 is very powerful, does a ton of damage, and if you're not against good carrier opposition, it has the most influence of all the tier 8 carriers in terms of doing offensive capability. And its glass cannon fighter, although you have no reserves, is also really, really strong, provided your team plays together and you don't have to be in multiple places on the map. Otherwise, you have to try and outbomb the enemy team. But that's not the setup that is good. The setup that is good is actually 203 Graf Zeppelin, because we have 3 waves of dive bombers. And the armor-piercing dive bombers do insane amounts of damage. But the critical difference between the Graf Zeppelin's dive bombers and the Enterprise dive bombers is the fact that the Graf Zeppelin is omnidirectional. It's a circular drop pattern, it can come from any direction. Whereas the Enterprise is an elliptical, so it has to come in from the tail of the nose. So there's more positional gameplay going on here. And that means the Graf Zeppelin can go in and not just battleships, but also tier 8 cruisers and just blap delete, or do huge amounts of damage so that the team can focus fire. And it's much harder for you to defend as the enemy carrier, or to defend against AP bombs, because they just have to fly in and drop, which means you have to defend in front of your ships, possibly an enemy AA, and it's not like positional gameplay where the planes have to fly around an island or that type of stuff. So in this case, the 203 Graf Zeppelin is extremely powerful if you are against very good opposition. Otherwise, you can probably get away with playing 1-2-1 Graf Zeppelin, mainly because it's lower tiers. Right, so that's the 8s, and I realize this is a short overview. There will be a following part 2 where we go into everything, specifically the tier 10 in much greater detail. So let's have a look at the tier 10 carriers. You've played the carrier, you've made it to the rank 10, which allows you to play tier 10. Now what do? Do you choose Hakuryu, or do you play Midway? Well, What's the difference? Hakuryu has 3 fighter planes, 3 torpedo bombers, and 2 high explosive dive bombers. The Midway has 2 fighter planes, 2 torpedo bombers, 2 armor-piercing dive bombs. The Midway has double the strike capability of the Hakuryu. It's extremely potent and powerful. It's got good plane reserves, better actually than the Hakuryu. The Hakuryu's got 30 planes. I believe the Midway has like 34. But the difference is that the Hakuryu only gets 2 waves. It has 555 and then 555 and then it loses everything. That's it. It has no spares. Whereas the Midway has 2 waves of 7, 2 waves of 7, and then a little bit left as a final kind of reserve emergency wave. Which means it's very easy in the tier 10 bracket to be lured in and then at long range AA like a Worcester 8.6 kilometer just to lose all your planes and just completely die. So it's more forgiving in the Midway. Plus the fact that you can double strike in the Midway means you can deal with all those AA ships, which are extremely difficult in the Hakuryu. Anything that's vulnerable to AP bombs, you can just delete. That is why the Midway is much, much stronger. And we're going to talk about that in the next video, about how you might play it in a kind of an overview map. So that is a very, very quick rundown of what ship to play. Now, in terms of loadouts, if you have the legendary upgrade on the Midway, you can choose to take that because it increases strike capability. Because you're not really necessarily playing defense. Modules is basically the same setup. Depending on the captain, you can go a variety of ways. I'm using legendary captain, but that's up to you. Now, the reason I'm judging this is because last season, Season 9, we also had rank Tier 10. And the maps aren't going to change, and the meta isn't really going to change. And that's why the Midway is strongest, because it has the ability to take down the AA targets. Because the AP armor-piercing bombs don't actually go after battleships anymore. They go after the cruisers. And there are many cruisers at tier 10 that are vulnerable. We're talking Zhao, Moskva, Worcester, Des Moines. These are all vulnerable to being deleted by armor-piercing bombs. The Hakuryu can't do that. Plus, the Hakuryu's 12 torpedo bombers don't actually do as much damage as the 12 torpedo bombers of the Midway, assuming you can get complete drops. Plus, the meta in the last season was very much cruiser-heavy. Because of the number and proliferation of radars, going in for the capture point is actually quite difficult and quite challenging. Specifically for destroyers, so not many people play destroyers, in my experience last season. And it's very similar to clan battles in that sense as well. So you're going to have an instance where everyone is going to be not necessarily rushing the cap, but kind of thinking about it, lots of cruisers, more targets in that sense, and you as the carrier may get locked out as well. And that also brings us to the next point. Following on from clan battles and the rarity of carrier games, we may find that defensive fires are not being used, or maybe they are being used in certain ships, like the Worcester always has a defensive fire, for example. So you may be able to delete like a Moskva or a Des Moines who snuggles up behind an island, doesn't have a defensive fire, and you just fly and boom, drop. And it's very, very difficult for the enemy carrier to defend him. Now, a team that does have a defensive fire like the Worcester, the Hakuryu is never going to kill him, period. He will never have the strike capability. He might be able to dislodge him position-wise, but you'll never be able to kill him because the defensive firepower is far too high. But with the double strike of the Midway, you can bait that defensive fire, and we're going to talk about it in the next video. Anyway, that is a brief overview of the CVs, what to pick. If you're going tier 8, use the Graf Zeppelin if you've got it. If you don't have the Graf Zeppelin, take the Enterprise. If you don't have the Enterprise, because I realize these are both premium ships, go for the Shukaku. Don't take the Lexington, please. Just, you won't be popular. And if you're going for tier 10, nothing is bad about the Hakuryu 332. If you play Hakuryu 422, you lose all semblance of strike, and you're purely 100% defense. But the problem is when two teams overlap their AA, you can't use your fighters to defend anymore, and then the enemy CV just bombs your team if he gets the opportunity, and then you lose. And the Midway is by far the better ship to pick. Anyway, that's it for now. Check out the next video. We'll go into more detail. I'll meet you next time.